talking about. So if we're going to talk about this in formats of addressing a problem, I think this whole weekend was started when Dano showed us this Google Doc of basically all of the ITPAA students that have come to ITP, and he scraped public LinkedIn data. And the question was, you know, what do we do with this information? How do we add value to it? And how do we engage each other as alums? So we all sat around and sort of identified, you know, a few areas that made sense to elaborate on. One being obviously social and events, another being like the skill sharing, and then obviously another thing being something like the ITP opportunities list. So opportunities list is great. It's something that I get work from. I know Ben gets work from. We all give each other work, but it kind of lacks structure, and you're still sort of, you know, out on a whim. You don't know how reliable some people are, or you don't know the quality of work, or just sometimes you don't really have the time to go through resumes or portfolios. You sort of just need a better infrastructure. So this is what we're addressing with ITP Freelancers Club. David?
Sure. There's only one mic, but just jump in if you guys want. So I think the questions or the problems we're dealing with is how do we leverage, to use a sturdy word, the ITP brand and network to get ITP freelancers and small business owners, like people running their own shops, consultancies, agencies, more and better work. And then we also need sort of meaningful work that's paid, real work experience for people who might be just graduating, or people who are looking to undergo career transitions. Maybe they came to ITP as one thing, and they wanted to try something else, but they can't necessarily get a job right away in a traditional agency. So, in other words, right, it's like, we want people to get access to meaningful work that's also paid, and where they can build their portfolios, and how do we do that collectively? So what is Freelancers Club? It's a mission-driven creative agency that's cooperatively owned and operated by ITP alumni and students. That's sort of projecting it into the future a little bit in terms of long-term goal of in the future, but we'll show you some steps where there's sort of immediate steps to do just in terms of organizing information, creating a database, and making it easier to refer work to each other. So in other words, it's sort of like Here Comes Everybody. Right? It's like a flash mob meets creative agency, or a cooperative guild for the 21st century, where people with shared interests, a shared craft and abilities are able to organize and kind of fill the role of, say, a guild or a traditional labor union, but still maintain their independence. So here's the evolution. So where we are now is right here. We have this alumni list, which is a great resource for learning about stuff. It's sort of a fire hose of sorts of information. And if there's a way for us to organize that in some way, maybe integrating it with what the database group is doing to build some more structured referral network where maybe there's some standardized format for portfolios or for rating each other or sort of validating each other's work, giving reviews to each other, etc. That's just one way of kind of taming the sort of general nature of the list and making it a little bit more task specific.
Yeah. So basically there's also the thing where there's a ton of freelancers right now and people who are looking for work on the ITP list. And there are also a ton of ITP alumni who have their own businesses or who maybe have work that they need to subcontract. And we already have this database and we have all this LinkedIn information. So if we could kind of connect and like checkmark all the freelancers that are looking for work and then checkmark all the alumni that are looking to hire, then that's kind of the first step that we need to take in kind of building this freelance community, so to speak.
I think even to elaborate on that more, just sort of like this, you know, to use a tech term, like an Ajax kind of script that's running. So it's looking for work, not looking for work, and then also having, you know, a skill set. So if I know that I need 10 graphic designers for this big project, or I need a graphic designer, two mechanical engineers, an electrical engineer, and yada yada, I can use this service to ping these people that all have their little green flags lit, and I don't have to sort through anything. It's sort of an automated process, so I'm already in talks with my subcontractors by end of day. And you know, a lot of what we do is nascent tech for, like, let's face it, advertisers and people that waste all of our timeline negotiating on a contract and give us 3 weeks to build something that we need 3 months to do. And you know, sometimes that would be sufficient if we have enough people we can subcontract to. So we're solving two problems. You know, trying to improve how this alumni list could be organized, but also being able to be more efficient with the time that we have.
And so the evolution of this is like, how can we take this to the next level of organization, right? So the first part was just helping to organize the ITP community to make it easier to refer work to each other. And then sort of the next level is, you know, to kind of use some Marxist language, how do you take control of the means of production, right? So a lot of us end up taking jobs at agencies. I've done it myself. You know, eventually we may open up our own small shops, but you know, is that necessarily needed if we're able to kind of create those structures ourselves? So the next step beyond the sort of referral database is essentially to become a talent or a staffing agency, whereas opposed to a lot of recruiters that I've talked to who are, you know, aren't necessarily creatives or technologists themselves. They kind of know what they're talking about, but not always. And so if it's sort of run by ITP people for ITP people, there's just sort of more of a cultural match and just a knowledge of the topics. And then sort of projecting that even farther in the future, it could become a full-service creative agency, where we all know that there's just a lot of overhead in the traditional industry model for creative agencies, where you know, the actual people doing the work are only getting a small percentage of the project budgets. So the value proposition for the different groups. The first is just members looking for work. So this could be current students, it could be alumni, either recent or more experienced alumni, making money, building your portfolio, getting access to real-world projects. It's gaining experience building your craft and sort of business experience as well. And the idea is to sort of not water down the mission of ITP itself and the curriculum. This is sort of an opt-in. So it can be a club that you join as a student to get some paid work and some sort of real world or industry experience while still maintaining the vision of ITP. And it's also giving support, right? Negotiating those things that none of us really want to deal with but have to deal with, like negotiating contracts, dealing with legal, also sort of group buying of insurance or access to services like 3D printing or other sorts of printing and other fabrication, so having preferential rates from group buying. And then for members who are looking to hire, maybe there's some people who are running their own agencies now or they're working in companies that are hiring. They can get access to and subcontract to members of this club who are rated or pre-vetted. So we heard from people who were doing recruitment at agencies they were working at and saying that even using the list is a great resource, but then sometimes they get like 20 resumes and portfolios, and how do you vet people, and that takes a lot of time. So is there a way to make that faster? And people like that could also get the same support to resources that we talked about before. And then sort of projecting it into the future, if there are external clients, like how can we be sort of cost competitive by cutting out some of the middlemen and sort of being an alternative to these traditional agencies. And how can we sort of give them access to both like pros, people who have like a lot of experience as well as students. So we'll show you a little bit later in our research that there's this model of kind of student-run agencies at a number of different schools, but there's kind of this like stigma sometimes of like it's always going to be like cheaper work or sort of lesser quality work, whether or not that's true or not. But because this is mixing alumni as well as students, we're able to address some of those issues. And then there's just this authenticity thing, right? Coming from the ITP brand and this Institute of the Recently Possible, these clients are getting access to sort of the real cutting edge of things. So this is some of our research. We looked at a lot of different kinds of references. There were like traditional freelance sites that are just more like kind of glorified job posts, or things like Elance. There were talent agencies where the problems that we mentioned before, where recruiters don't necessarily know what they're talking about, or they don't really know how to deal with somebody who's saying like, oh, I'm just looking for this like 2-month thing or like 10 hours a week while I'm working on something else, because their sort of business model is based on like sort of longer term or higher volume placements. Traditional creative agencies, where we talked about before, the transaction costs are really high. W plus K-12 is Wyden and Kennedy 12, and basically they have this agency within an agency where they bring in recent grads and more junior people to basically create agency within an agency / school. So it's sort of this apprenticeship model, and they are able to kind of charge a little bit less to work with local clients in Portland who aren't Nike, basically. Guilds are sort of this, comes from this medieval model of like skilled trades people, crafts people, but they exist today as well, sort of in the, for example, like the SAG or the Screen Actors Guild and things like that, that are able to negotiate things like rates or kind of just standardize some things in the industry. And talking to some of the more recent grads or people who are new to freelancing, like how do you negotiate your rates? And it's different to sort of just be the lone freelancer versus like kind of having a posse to back you up and saying like, well, this is our sort of collective rate or our minimum, right? The student-run agencies we talked about before. The Park Slope Food Co-op is on here because we were looking at business models and how to organize the membership. So maybe people buy into like a share or a membership fee to start out with, and then they volunteer some of their time, a certain number of hours a month or a year, to help work on things that the collective needs. And then AIGA and Freelancers Union are just sort of existing kinds of professional organizations. AIGA is good for sort of advocating for design as a profession in general, but it may be too general for just the ITP community, and it doesn't necessarily get you a gig specifically as a designer. And then Freelancers Union is also very general as well, so it may be good for like buying insurance, but it's not sort of specialized enough for the needs of our community. So the business model, so this is kind of, these are more proposals rather than like kind of set in stone, but like.
And Haley, Sean, I don't want to disrupt, but we're going to try to keep the presentations to 12 minutes. You're at 12 minutes. Don't feel like you have to rush it, but we'll just keep going through.
We're almost done.
Yep.
So starting out, people pay dues or volunteer time. When external clients come along, they pay the freelancers rate, obviously, plus a percentage to the agency to just kind of keep things afloat. And where does that money go, right? It goes to paying the members for doing work, covers the organizational costs of Freelancers Club. It can support benefits, it can support other alumni association programs, and then if there's stuff left over, you could do a profit share back to the members in the co-op. How to get started. So the immediate next step is to just kind of opt in, right? We have a database of everybody from ITP, so who is actually looking for work as a freelancer, who's trying to hire talent, and just trying to map that out. Once we figure out if there is this sort of actual need, we can build the community, things like building the web presence, follow-up meetings, and kind of dividing up the work more concretely. And then finally, there's also additional research, right? Like, this is the client side of things, of the people who are actually going to be funding this. So what are their needs, and what is our market niche vis-a-vis traditional agencies, and then sorting out our business model as an organization. And these are things that we can talk about in a Q&A or discussion. It's just like, and how do we have a tiered rate model for different kinds of clients or different kinds of experience levels? And then how do we incentivize sort of people who are very experienced to join this if they don't have any, they don't have a need to get work, they get plenty of work themselves, and how do they encourage getting newbies to participate, and then other things like, are there reviews, endorsements of both members as well as clients? Is there some way of aggregating their portfolios, of like having news about what people are up to in this collective? And then are there sort of automated alerts, right? If there's like a new business opportunity, could you get like a mobile notification saying like, hey, we're looking for the people with this kind of skills, and it just kind of pings you automatically. So these were just kind of some more assorted thoughts to talk about, and so we'd love to just kind of hear how you guys feel about this or answer any questions.